Hello, sleepy heads. Tonight we drift into the shadowed sands of ancient Egypt. The land where the air was thick with resin, natron, and the whispered secrets of linen-draped chambers. What poets call enigmatic and wanderers deem mystical, the embalmers knew as their daily craft. Meticulous, sacred, and quietly unsettling, as routine can render the extraordinary mundane. Before you settle into the embrace of the Nile's lullaby, offer a nod to the gods. Tap like and subscribe if this slow, ancient tale soothes your soul. Share a word in the comments, telling us from which corner of the world you listen and what are the stars marked there. It's a wonder to think of this sacred space stretching across the horizons. Now, lower the lanterns. Let a soft breeze mimic the hum of a tune's eternal silence. And let us glide into tonight's tale. The solemn art of Egyptian embalmers, spoken gently enough to cradle you to sleep, yet vivid enough to linger in your dreams by dawn. Warm dust presses like a cloth over clay walls and wicker screens, and the day's heat lingers in the rafters the way a thought refuses to leave. Oil lamps breathe low and slow, their sort of thin ribbon that curls and forgets itself near the ceiling. A fly tests the window lattice and finds it stubborn. Another tries the bowl of dates and is waved away without looking. The room has already changed its mind about talking. Words have become heavy, and hands do the speaking instead. Breath stopped a short while ago, long enough for silence to feel natural, not long enough for the air to turn mean. Good news, there is time to be gentle. Bad news, time is a shallow bowl, and heat drinks quickly. A shallow basin arrives, set carelessly, then corrected to careful on a small wooden stand. Water shines, catching lamp flicker. Palm wine waits beside it, a clean bite in a room of warm things. A cloth is found, then another. Then better ones are reconsidered and left in the chest. The first choices are ordinary, frayed edges, softened by years of washing against shoulders and wrists. Linen makes that small rasp when folded, a whisper that always sounds like it remembers names. Someone rinses a strip and wrings it until it drips just once. The sound is small, but decisive, like a seal pressed on wax. Eyes are closed with the same care used to still a child's bad dream. The jaw is eased, a gentle push, a patient pause. Then a band of cloth passes over the crown and under the chin to keep ceremony from untying itself. The skin has not decided whether it will hold its color. Oil is touched to the temples and wrists, not to pretend at life, but to keep dignity in the room. The smell is subtle, olive, and something the family can afford. The reed pen begins its quiet stretch in the corner, where a cousin sits cross-legged with a tablet. The list is simple and exacting because grief loses track of small things. One copper ring with a dent, one collar of blue glass beads, a bit of twisted gold on a cord. The items are named out loud, then repeated by another voice that is trying to be steady. A dish receives them and is covered by an upside-down bowl, a ritual of honesty that also keeps flies from thinking they were invited. Palm wine stings the air when the cloth is dipped. The first pass is across the hands. Fingers that knew the weight of jars and baskets, that learned how to read grain with touch alone, now rest open and quiet. The cloth moves in circles, wrist, forearm, elbow. The arc is small and respectful, like cleaning the face of a household god before dawn. Oil follows, just enough to leave a sheen where dusk has made everything matte. The body learns to be an object slowly. The living do not rush the lesson. A neighbor who is good at practicalities checks the shutters and the door reed. The tiny current through the room is precious. It takes the high smell of the lamp and shares it with the courtyard. It brings in the faint salt of the river even if the water is streets away. Those who have done this before know the rules. Light low, air moving, cloths clean, mouths closed unless words are needed. Someone thinks of honey and dismisses it. That is another stage, another place, not this house. The body is eased from mattress to reed mat, a respectful shift that keeps bedding from learning the wrong scent. Reeds creak. The mat is warm from the day and will cool as the floor gives back what the sun took. A pillow is removed. Linen is pulled flat. Wrinkles disappear beneath a flat hand. Appearance matters because memory cheats. If the last picture is tidy, the mind will keep it that way. A small brazier at the doorway receives a pinch of incense, just enough to make a line of sweetness that thins a room full of heavy things. The smoke is not for hiding anything. It is a reminder that breath is still present in the house, even if not in the chest on the mat. The youngest child watches from behind a woven screen and is gently steered toward the courtyard by an aunt with soft feet. Some parts of the day are not for small eyes, even in a culture where death sits at the table when it likes. Talk begins in the polite code that keeps a family from breaking in half. Names are not said first. Numbers are. A question about natron, a memory of a neighbor's burial, and what the priests charged. A glance at the linen chest. How much can be spared without stripping beds? A cousin mentions a man who knows the embalmers. Another lowers a voice and mentions the cheaper men who pretend. The room keeps its shape while money enters it. Good news. There are choices. Bad news. Choices are a wheel that crushes feelings flat. Scribes appear in talk before they appear in the doorway. A messenger will have to go. The name is rehearsed along with the fathers and the titles that should follow. The messenger is picked for speed, for trustworthiness, and because his face is not a mirror of the family's grief. He will carry a little oil on his wrists, so the embalmers know the house has already begun what needs beginning. He will carry a coin for the first conversation. Not payment, not yet. Permission to be heard. Flies find their courage again and test the air near the mat. A fan of woven palm fronds is set beside the body and used with slow discipline, not to chase, but to remind. The fan's sound is a small breath the room keeps using when it forgets. Shadows lengthen and cool along the floor as the sun performs its merciful trick of leaving. A jar of water is placed under the table where heat collects, so the air will drink from it and soften. These are old habits. They were learned from older hands. The inventory is finished and read back. The bowl stays over the dish. The cousin's pen rests. The name of the embalmer's wabet is finally said aloud. A pure place, but also a workplace. The phrase sits uncomfortably in the middle of the room like a guest who has arrived early. The family knows what it means to send someone out of the domestic circle and into professional care. It is a second death, the moment when grievers stop deciding and workers start. Before the messenger leaves, a last pass of the cloth goes across the brow and cheeks. The skin is cooler now. The smell in the room has changed by a degree so small it can only be felt by those who have been through this before. A clean sheet is laid lightly, not a shroud, not yet, a promise to return. An amulet is touched and then returned to its string box. It will go later, when the master of the wabet says where it belongs. The family allows the future to tell the present what to do. In the courtyard, a jug is tilted and cups are poured with less wine than the occasion deserves. There is bread, but no one chews it. Hunger is present out of habit, not need. An elder says a quiet line about the river and the west bank and the journey that every family practices, whether rich or ordinary. The neighbor nods. Grief has a script and everyone knows their lines. When the messenger steps into the street, the house takes a breath it did not realize it was holding. The fan moves, the incense thread thins, and is replaced with a new pinch. The lamp is trimmed again to keep the wick from smoking like an accusation. The door reed ticks as the air passes. Good news, the room is ready. Bad news, readiness is only the first kindness. The work that matters most will happen out of sight, in hands trained to make the unthinkable ordinary, and the ordinary sacred. For now, the still house keeps watch. It knows how to wait. The house keeps its breath while the messenger goes, and in that pause the quiet tasks turn into quiet rules. Grief makes room for procedure, and hands reach for tablets and chords and numbers that mean the work will move forward by morning. A reed pen starts to whisper again, a soft scratch that sounds like someone thinking out loud, and a wax tablet warms under a thumb as a cousin rubs a smooth spot before writing the first line. Name. Father's name, mother's name, titles if any, and the neighborhood that will vouch for both life and character. Witnesses are recruited the way spices are measured, enough to make a difference without wasting what is precious, and a neighbor with clear eyes agrees to listen and repeat the list so no one can claim later that grief bent the memory into a better story. The list is blunt because the world is blunt when it comes to property. One copper ring with the dent, one blue glass collar, one linen belt with the frayed end, and the scribe draws a small dot after each so the eye does not rush past what the hand must account for. Bread is broken without ceremony, and the heel smells faintly sour from the day, and beer is poured thin because mouths are dry from holding back words, and no one really eats, but everyone touches food so the room remembers it is for the living as well as the dead. The messenger returns with the first answer that matters. The embalmers can receive the body at dawn, and their man has a quiet way of saying prices as if they were prayers that will be spoken whether anyone likes them or not. 3 paths are drawn with the same pen, full treatment with long drying and careful wrapping and amulets placed by rule. partial treatment with less resin and fewer layers, and a symbolic rite that treads lightly for those who must count every coin in the chest. Eternity, itemized, salt by measure, linen by the arm span, oil by the small jar that can be sealed with wax, prayers by the number recited, and each line has a price that sits on the table like another guest who must be offered water. The scribe repeats the tiers as if the words themselves could make them less heavy, and the family listens with the patience of people who know that not deciding is also a decision that invites heat to do the deciding later. Cool water runs into a stone basin in the courtyard to settle everyone's hands and mouths, and the sound is a relief, a small river that says the night will keep moving even if the house wants to stand still. An aunt asks the only funny question there is tonight. Does the price include the part where they remember to be kind? And the embalmer's man smiles the little smile that says real kindness is extra, but the craft will not forget itself. Eternity, itemized. A jar of myrrh for scent and blessing, cedar oil for sealing hollows, natron by the basket that will need refilling, and the little cones of resin that turn to gloss when warmed over a careful flame. The reed pen scratches totals, and then scratches them again, because subtraction is hard when the heart is loud, and a second tablet is used to compare numbers, like a mirror facing a mirror, until both agree. Wax warms under a thumb again, and a small seal is pressed into the tablet to mark agreement that is not yet payment, but a promise that the house will not vanish when asked to bring the body. A little humor returns as the neighbor asks whether the embalmers charge extra if the deceased snored in life. And the man answers that those who snored usually require more linen around the mouth for the peace of everyone, which earns a few grateful exhales that are almost laughter. The provisioning begins in earnest, and it looks like ordinary errands turn solemn. A list for linen lengths, a note for natron baskets, a reminder for oil jars to be stoppered with wax and tied with cord, and a small sachet for the cones of resin. A boy is sent to the linen cellar with 2 coins and instructions to choose fabric that is soft enough to fold well, but plain enough not to tempt a hand to keep it. And he repeats the instructions back so no one can say he misunderstood. Another is sent to the man who keeps natron in large bins and measures it with a bowl that has a notch in the rim, and the note tells him clean crystals if he has them, and no damp, because damp is a thief that steals time. At the basin, cool water is poured again over wrists, and the stone gives back a smell as if it, too, has sweat and must be soothed. And the simple act of washing becomes a way to agree that this is happening at a reasonable pace. Eternity, itemized. A fee for the man who will carry messages at dawn, a coin for the porter who will lift with care and not pretend to forget, a handful for the boys who will fetch and return without tasting the oil. The wax tablet now holds to columns what the family can provide and what must be taken from the workshop stores, and the scribe draws a soft line between them so the eye sees the border that money will have to cross. Bread is set out again because no one remembers that it was already set out, and the heel tastes a little more sour, and someone dips a piece in beer and decides that is a bad idea and sets it down with a rueful mouth. A small prayer is spoken not to a god but to the ledger. May the numbers add up without insult. May there be room for a kindness that is not charged. May the chest close and still have a little weight left. The embalmer's man lifts the corner of the sheet with 2 fingers to see the face and lowers it again with the kind of care that does not cost extra. And he nods once in a way that says, "We can do this properly." Eternity, itemized, temporary wrapping for the night, so the house can rest, a light cord to hold it neat, a small pinch of resin warmed between palms to seal the knot, and a promise that the sheet will be changed at dawn for travel. Linen comes back from the cellar folded tight and smelling like the room where it waited, a dry clean scent of dust and old sunlight, and when unfurled it makes that soft breath sound that good cloth makes when it agrees to work. The first layer is simple, a long strip under the body, so lifting will be easy and no one will have to grab at a limb, and another across the chest to keep hands from falling open in the night, and the fan continues its quiet duty by the feet. A tiny cone of resin is warmed between fingers until it yields, and then pressed over a knot, so the end does not flick loose and tickle the mind all night with the fear of coming undone. At the doorway, the brazier takes another pinch, and the sweetness returns without being cloying, as if the room is allowed one polite dessert before the long fast of work begins tomorrow. The scribe reads the tablet once more, and then presses the seal again, and the warm wax takes the impression cleanly, because the night air has settled into a workable kindness. Eternity, itemized, offerings for the morning, bread, beer, a small onion, and a pinch of salt. Because hospitality does not end at doors or at death, and generosity has a way of making skilled hands more careful. A bowl is washed and turned upside down over the dish that already holds the counted items, and the gesture is the same as earlier, but it means more now that money has entered the story and given everything sharper edges. The embalmer's man takes his leave with a phrase that is both greeting and contract at first light, and the room answers with the smallest bow of shoulders that have carried a day longer than usual. In the courtyard, cups find mouths at last, and the beer is more sour than anyone wanted, but the taste is honest and cuts through the resin and the oil and the heat that liked to pretend it was not there. Inside, the temporary wrapping holds. The knots are neat. The basin is emptied and set upside down to dry, and the fan is set against the wall so its woven face can rest. The wax tablet is placed beside the door, where messengers sleep, and the seal faces up like a small moon that has agreed to be seen, and a cord is looped through the tablet so it can be hung on a wrist at dawn and not dropped in the dust. Eternity, itemized. One house that did not fall apart under the first weight. One night that will be long but not endless. One set of footsteps that will cross the threshold when the light returns with everything promised and just enough left over. Morning arrives like a soft correction to the long night, and the seal on the tablet is still clean when a thumb tests it. and the cord loops twice around her wrist so the promise does not slip in the street. The first sound is the woven mat scratching as it is pulled closer to the door. The reeds speaking in their dry language that always sounds like a quiet refusal, and then a reluctant yes. Porters appear with the kind of humility that looks like indifference from a distance and care up close. Their feet dusted white at the edges, shoulders ready, hands resting with fingers spread as if measuring weight before it arrives. They greet the house without stepping in, because thresholds decide what counts as family and what counts as work. And today the line needs to stay bright. The embalmer's man returns his nod from last night and asks nothing new, because the night already asked enough. And he glances once at the basin to see that it is upside down and clean. From quiet grief to practiced lifting, the change is measured in 3 breaths, and for hands placed at ribs and hips. And the mat sighs when the weight shifts, and the sheet holds like a promise remembered in time. A small amulet in the shape of a jackal waits in a palm and stays cool despite the morning, the figure's nose pointing outward as if it knows the route by memory older than anyone alive. From shade to light, the door reed stirs, shoulders tilt, feet find the same rhythm porters always find when to carry one, and the room that kept watch all night lets the body pass without complaint. Outside, the street is already thinking about heat, but the sun on clay is still gentle enough to forgive slow walkers, and neighbors find places to stand that are not quite in the way and not quite absent. From private to public, eyes register the bundle as a fact among morning facts, like bread loaves on boards and water jars on heads. And then the eyes look away to spare themselves and to spare the family. The footfall rhythm evens out by the 3rd doorway, a soft thud and scuff that lets courtyards know to quiet their own noises for a breath. And the fan from the night is left leaning against the wall like a retired guardian. At the threshold of the quarter, there is a pause to tighten the cord around the sheet and to touch the jackal once to the forehead beneath. A gesture that feels like locking a door from the inside and the outside at the same time. From house dust to street dust, the smell changes. Less oil and incense, more sun-warmed clay and yesterday's water, and it feels honest in a way that grief sometimes resents. The embalmer's man walks a step ahead, neither leading nor following, a buffer between curious faces and the work, and he greets a vendor with a half-voice that says both yes and later. The messenger from the night carries the tablet in his left hand, because the right must stay free for door curtains and quick courtesies, and the wax warms just enough to take a thumbprint like a second seal raised by the heat. From alley to open street, the wine arrives with the river's breath hiding inside it, bringing a cool that lasts as long as the width of a doorway, and then lets go. And that is enough to keep the pace steady. A boy runs ahead to ask that a cart give way, and the cart does, because the bundle on the mat commands the old deference that outlives titles and arguments. The porters shift hands near the market, and the mat answers with that dry voice again. And one of them murmurs the small joke all porters share, that mats never learned to like their job, but do it anyway. From chatter to hush, A corner is turned where a shrine watches, and even those who do not pray let their mouths close to let the air move without words for the length of the shrine shadow. The wabet announces itself without sound, shade where there should be glare, water jars lined like quiet guards, a bench that has learned to be a threshold more than a seat. There is a way to enter that is not walking. The first step is small, and then smaller, and the last breath of outside is left just past the lintel so the inside can keep its own air and rules. From family hands to professional hands, the transfer is measured in the moment when fingers loosen and different fingers take responsibility. And nothing drops because the space between grips is brief and disciplined. The master of the place does not hurry and does not delay. And his first act is to greet the living before he greets the dead, because the living must allow the work to become real. A small prayer is spoken that is not about heaven or judgment, but about steadiness and clean tools and salt that arrives dry. And the room answers with its usual sound, the faint clink of bronze and the light tap of a jar against wood. From heat to cool, the air inside holds a different promise, less of bodies and more of materials. The sweetness of resin faint and persuasive, as if remembering is a fragrance that you choose to follow. The jackal amulet is passed to a bowl with a linen pad so it will not click against clay. And the bowl is set where the master's eye can find it without searching. The tablet changes wrists, and the seal is read with a glance. And the scribe of the place checks the names against the days list that has its own neat column for time of arrival, and the small note for offerings. From public glance to private craft, the curtain falls behind the porters, and with it the weight of street attention. And only the work remains with its quiet appetite for order. A fee is acknowledged without counting out loud, the way one acknowledges a wind that has already passed, and the master touches the mat as if greeting an old colleague he respects, but never calls by a first name. The family stands where visitors stand, just inside, not yet dismissed, and not asked to come closer. And the space gives them a kindness, a view of the chest rising and falling not with breath, but with the small motions of preparation that look like breathing if you wish. From the door to the table, for hands, one step, then another, and the mat's song ends when it meets the wood that has learned this particular duty. Threshold prayers belong to mouths that know what not to promise, and the masters are exactly that. May the hands be sure, may the salts be pure, may the bindings remember the shape they serve. The smell shifts the last degree. House and street fall away, workshop dust and resin rise, and the mind senses the border as clearly as the feet felt the threshold. From presence to permission, a final look passes between the master and the eldest relative, and the smallest nod travels back like a messenger who knows the route and the rules. The porters step backward, not turning their backs yet. And then they do turn, because this place has its own gravity, and the door reed speaks softly as they leave. The amulet's cool is replaced by the warmth of a palm over linen, a human blessing that costs nothing and is worth more than any name for it. And then the hand lifts so work can begin when the words for beginning are spoken. From the still house to the pure place, the journey completes without drama. And that is the measure of respect. And outside the sun climbs toward its less forgiving self, while inside the air stays the kind that helps tools behave. The living step back, the last half step that separates grief from craft, and the master steps forward, the half step that accepts the charge. And between those two small movements, the whole world rearranges itself around a table, a body, and a promise kept. The change from street to inside is a change of temperature and of intention. Hot light left at the threshold. Cool shade gathered like a second skin that the room wears for serious work. This place is built to persuade the day to slow down. Walls thick enough to hold back noon. A roofline that spills light gently into corners, and a doorway that narrows sound as if it were water poured through a funnel. Shade, salt, linen, the three quiet pillars of what happens here, spoken not aloud, but by arrangement and habit. By where things rest when no one touches them. Start at the door and let the eyes learn the map before the feet move. A bench that is not for sitting, a table that is not for eating, jars that have learned to wait without complaint. Natron sits in open bins along the north wall, a shallow sea turned into crystals, and if a pond sinks into it, the grit talks back with a dry hiss that sounds like a promise to keep what it holds. Bronze tools rest on a low shelf near the main table, each with a place drawn by repetition: small knives, hooks, tweezers, spoons, needles, their edges oiled and their jaws shut as if sleeping with one eye open. When a hand lifts one, there is that soft clink of metal against metal that never reaches for drama, a sound that says, "We know what to do. Do not rush us." Resin warms in shallow bowls where a lamp can reach without scorching, and the fragrance is the room's memory made liquid. Pine sweet, a little bitter, persuasive without being heavy. Water jars stand where shade is deepest, tall-shouldered, ringed at the neck with loops for lifting. And when a wet ring taps a wooden board, it makes a round note that stays long enough to be felt. The air is a pact between materials and intention, not cold, never stale. Cool where it must be cool, so salt behaves like a friend, and oil does not sulk in its cup. Linen is everywhere once the eyes learn to see it, folded on shelves in measured stacks, hanging in loose loops near the wrapping table, waiting as strips in baskets, the color of clouds that have learned to be patient. Shade, salt, linen, the mantra that the room repeats without sound, a rhythm that keeps hands from forgetting what comes next when minds wander toward memory or fear. The room's layout is not for beauty, but for the shortest, safest path between tasks. Door to table, table to salt, salt to water, water to oils, oils to linen, linen to shrine. A small shrine occupies a corner that is not the center and not the edge, a place where eyes can find reassurance without performance, where a jackal-headed figure keeps watch with a gaze that seems to notice tools more than faces. Offerings there are modest and always fresh, a crumb of bread, a sip of beer, a flower when the river season agrees, an incense cone that waits for the next brief fire. The floor tells as much as the shelves, swept often, sprinkled lightly to keep dust from believing it owns the place. Footprints that begin crisp near the door and grow faint where the work demands the most careful feet. At the main table, wood is worn to satin where palms rest between steps, where elbows hover but seldom land, where linen learns to drape and then to bind. A second, smaller table holds the quiet instruments of measurement, cord with knots at known distances, a rod with old notches, small weights that do not brag about their precision, but deliver it. There is a place for fire, and it is both near and far, near enough to soften resin when it must flow, far enough that nothing dries by accident or breathes smoke it did not invite. Rules live here as furniture. Tools returned to their exact spots, jars stoppered and turned, salts covered at night, cloths counted aloud before and after, floors washed from the shrine outward, so the clean remembers where it started. Purity is not a sermon, but a sequence. Water first, then salt, then oil, then cloth, then words in the right order so hands can trust what mouths have promised. The doorway itself behaves like a gatekeeper. It narrows light to a ribbon that lays itself across the floor and stops where shade begins, reminding bodies that inside has different weather and different manners. A screened alcove holds baskets for organs and jars for those who will receive them, each jar with a lid that looks like a face ready to work, not to judge. The lids rest side by side, as if listening. Human, baboon, jackal, falcon, not an audience, but a team whose job is to keep, to guard, to remember what each piece must know. When a jar is moved, pottery answers the board with a low, round sound, and when water meets clay, a darker ring rises like a breath taken and held. In the far corner, a basket of sponges and small pads waits for the work no one praises, wiping, catching, smoothing, the soft labor that prevents the need for louder skills later. Shade, salt, linen. The refrain returns while a hand trails the edge of the table, the wood cool as if it had learned how to hold spring inside it all year. The ceiling keeps a language of its own, rafters that make lines for eyes to follow when the mind needs to steady itself, beams that creak only when heat changes, and never when hands do their careful work. Bronze announces presence without threat, a glimmer along an edge, a hint of weight in a palm, a balance that tells a story of sharpening stones and patient wrists. Natron does not sparkle out of vanity, but because it remembers the sun it left behind, light breaking into small promises that will be kept grain by grain. Resin in its bowls looks like a small, tame amber sea, and when a lamp's breath warms it, the surface loosens, the scent steps forward, and even the air seems to smooth its hair. The water jars sweat lightly where shade touches them, and a fingertip can draw a cool track that evaporates slowly, the way patience leaves a mark and then becomes invisible. Near the shrine, a folded cloth lies that never meets the table. It belongs to words, not to bodies, and is lifted only when utterances ask for company. Rules of order are posted nowhere and known by everyone. Speak softly or not at all when tools change hands. Never point with a blade. Count linen with open palms. Cover salt when you step away. Thank water when you pour it. A small bell is not for alarm, but for beginnings. A single note when the first task starts. A second when the last finishes. a way for time to be marked without being chased. Along the south wall, a rack holds cords and straps that do not look like bindings until they are tied, their fibers burnished by use into something that behaves more like memory than rope. The door curtain wears dust at its hem like a ring that shows how far the outside is allowed to come in, and no farther. Every station in the room is a sentence in a paragraph that always reads the same way: approach, prepare, perform, put back, speak gratitude, step aside. The shrine looks on without blinking, and in that steady gaze the workers find a companion more than a judge, a presence that understands what clean means when it touches what used to be alive. Shade pools at the base of jars, and under the lip of the table, and inside the bowls that hold nothing yet. Coolness as a resource, like salt and cloth, measured and respected. Sometimes a breeze reaches through the doorway, and the room answers by tightening its grip on its own air, a subtle resistance that keeps flames small and scents honest. A reed mat leans against the wall, retired from carrying for the moment, its reeds singing a faint dry note when fingers pass, as if recalling yesterday's load with pride and a little complaint. In this place, tools behave because they are treated like colleagues, named by their uses, praised when they spare a second or a drop, corrected without anger when they slip. The room's order is not perfection, but forgiveness arranged in advance. Basins where spills can go, cloths ready for drops, a brush for salt that clings in corners, a habit of pausing before turning so nothing is knocked aside. Shade, salt, linen, the gentle drumbeat under every motion, the way a heart keeps time under breath, the reminder that this is labor and devotion sharing the same bench. When footsteps cross the threshold, the floor accepts them like a ledger accepts ink. Clean lines, no flourish, just the next necessary mark on a page that belongs to a careful craft. And when the work pauses, the sounds that remain are the room's own music. A bronze clink somewhere near a shelf, a water jar's ring fading into the plank, the soft scratch of natron settling, the almost speech of resin remembering the tree it left, all of it held by shadow coolness that makes noon forget itself for a while. Shade, salt, linen, spaces are built by materials, but they are kept honest by people whose hands know what to ask and when to be quiet. The master arrives without announcement, and the room adjusts like a cloak settling on shoulders. Not a sound louder, just a sense that the lines on the floor have become brighter and the corners more certain. He's not grand. Oiled hands, clean nails, a scar at one knuckle where a tool once insisted on its opinion, and a way of standing that says the table is an equal and the salt a partner. When he touches a knife, it looks like greeting a colleague. When he sets it down, it sounds like a yes that will be repeated later in linen. He speaks first to the living, because the living must agree to let steadiness lead. A few words about clean water, a nod at the jars, a glance to see if grief has left any room for instructions. Apprentices gather in the wake of that nod, one with hands still smelling faintly of laundry clay, another with chalky linen dust on forearms, a third rolling a cord between fingers to keep them from arguing with nerves. Their work is the room's heartbeat, fetching water that looks the same each time, smoothing cloth until silence folds into it, counting aloud in soft voices so the table believes the numbers. They oil tools with a thrift that would impress the gods if the gods kept ledgers. A drop on a cloth, a pass along an edge, a breath to test if friction has learned its manners. When one apprentice fumbles a hook, the master does not scold. He takes the boy's wrist, turns it a degree, and says the workshop's joke almost solemnly, ask the hand to behave, and it will remember it has joined a serious household. In a corner, the specialist with the surest lines on his palm waits for the day's first incision, not eager, never afraid, thinking through the motion as if it were a path between two courtyards. One step here, one breath there. His blade is small, his pride smaller, and he has learned the trick of finishing a gesture before the mind can chase it with worry. Another specialist lives among oils and resins the way a fisherman lives by the river. Nose first, then memory, then measure, choosing what softens, what seals, what persuades dryness to become grace instead of brittleness. He warms a bowl with his hands before the lamp comes close, listening to resin as if it could complain, promising it a gentle fire and a purpose that will outlast every name in the room. The amulet keeper is quiet even for this place, fingers small, attention wide, a map in the head that runs from throat to heart to wrist to tongue, each stop a reason, each placement a sentence in a language that linen can read. When a new apprentice asks where to put a charm against forgetting, the keeper taps the spot above the heart and smiles with the softness of someone who knows that hearts are not always where people think they are. At the side table sits the scribe, the workshop's memory in human form, a reed pen that never hurries, and a wax tablet that holds the day's promises until they can be copied into something less meltable. His hands are not oiled, but the sheen on his fingers is real. It comes from rubbing the tablet smooth and from the small slide of wax that makes a line ready for truth. Tally marks dry in neat fences, each stroke a gate that opens only when linen and salt have passed through in the agreed amounts. Not a grain more, not a strip less. He counts eternity in measures that make sense to the table. Arm spans of cloth, bowls of natron, drops of cedar, the way a cook measures a feast by ladles and not by the size of the guests' stories. When the master speaks an instruction, the scribe translates it into marks, and when the apprentices finish a task, the scribe translates their breath back into inkless trust. Done, seen, recorded. There is humor here, but it wears soft shoes. An apprentice asks if there is a prayer to keep knots from misbehaving, and the scribe answers that knots obey linen, and linen obeys hands that have been asked politely. The master walks the perimeter the way a farmer walks fields, looking for edges that have learned bad habits, pausing by the shrine to place a crumb, and to nod at the jackal who minds the door between kinds of quiet. Oiled hands hover over tools, not touching unless necessary, and when they do touch the bronze, they leave a shine that is less vanity than a promise to reduce friction when the work reaches for calm. Chalky linen dust hangs in the light like softened snow, and when a strip is torn, it gives a sigh that belongs to fabric agreeing to become something more solemn than clothing. Murmured prayers travel the room without bumping into anyone. Little strings of words that fasten attention to motion, not requests for miracles. Just reminders to breath and blade and salt to do their ordinary best. The incision man sharpens silence before he sharpens steel. A breath in, a breath out, a blade drawn lightly along stone. The sound as clean as a line drawn by a teacher who expects the lesson to be remembered. The oil specialist tips a bowl and watches a drop hesitate, then fall, then spread its decision across a surface that was waiting, and says to no one in particular that patience is cheaper than more resin. The amulet keeper lays out small shapes on a cloth reserved for speaking and touches each one with a fingertip as if asking its name to answer back. Then gathers them in a sequence the body will understand later. The scribe lifts his eyes to count heads, and then lowers them to count linen again, a rhythm that keeps the workshop from confusing people with materials or tasks with titles. When a new family steps to the door, the master's shoulders soften a fraction so the room can receive sorrow without swallowing it, and the apprentices straighten the way reeds straighten when wind changes its mind. A brief exchange confirms names and promises. The scribe listens with one ear and copies with the other, and the pen's tip makes a sound like feet on swept ground. Hands are washed, dried, oiled again, and the master repeats the workshop's quiet motto as if telling it to a shy child. Ask the hands to behave, and they will remember what they came here to do. The room receives the next small weight on its table, and everyone returns to their stations. A choreography without music, where the downbeat is a blade set gently down, and the upbeat is linen lifted without fuss. Tally marks lengthen by one, then rest, and the scribe blows lightly across the wax to cool the newest line, the breath of blessing that does not need a name. The incision man steps forward only when asked, and steps back as soon as the path is clear for salt, and he wipes the blade with a cloth that has a place on the shelf and a reputation for catching what should not wander. Oil spreads where dryness needs diplomacy, and the specialist smiles the private smile of someone who convinced a stubborn hinge to swing without a squeak. The amulet keeper's fingers move like someone threading a memory through a needle, placing small assurances where absence is loudest, never rushing the quiet. The scribe totals the morning so far and places a dot that means pause, not stop, and looks up long enough to meet the master's eye and receive a nod that translates to continue. In this way, a craft becomes a community, by people whose names will not be painted on coffins, but whose habits will outlast every pigment in the room. And the room, satisfied, keeps its own small counsel, a blade that prefers a certain shelf, a jar that rings true when full, linen that folds better when asked, not ordered. All of it held together by a ledger that counts not only what is used, but what is spared, which is another way to measure respect. Agreement in this place is a calm thing, a nod from the master, a measured breath from the scribe, a space made at the table so talk can turn into plan without bruising anyone's grief. Tier selection is spoken plainly because clarity is a kind of kindness, full treatment with long drying and layered wrapping and named amulets. Partial treatment with fewer oils and simpler bindings. Symbolic treatment for households that must measure sorrow in coins and cloth. Good work begins by naming what can be done and what must be spared, and each path is a road that leads to the same door by different lengths and with different views. The scribe repeats the tiers and waits for a word, and the reed pen feels heavier until it has a direction to move in, and then it becomes light again. Happy as a tool is when it is allowed to do the job it was shaped for. A resin cone meets a small flame and gives off a thin smoke ribbon, not a show, just a sign that intention has warmed enough to travel, and the room accepts the scent like an old instruction remembered. Good work begins by measuring the promise. Linen is lifted by arm span, fingertip to sternum, counted aloud in a low voice that lets cloth learn. It will be asked to hold shape and memory at once. Natron is requested by the bowl that fits the hand, chock-cold crystals scooped and leveled so that dryness will behave like a slow river and not a flood, and a lid is set over the bin with an affectionate tap. The schedule is not secret and not negotiable with weather or worry. 40 days to dry what once held water and words, 30 days to wrap and bless and secure what remains to carry meaning. Checkpoints are promised without drama. A visit at the first week to confirm the salt is doing what salt does. A mid-course look to adjust padding and guard against edges. A final viewing before the last bindings and names. Good work begins by making time visible. The scribe draws small marks along the wax edge that stand for days, notches that will vanish under a thumb as each morning says its piece and steps aside. Quiet bowls are set in a line at the foot of the table. One for water, one for oil, one for resin made soft, one empty to receive what the work will ask to be set down and kept out of the way. The master speaks brief utterances to the tools, a courtesy and a boundary. You will cut cleanly, you will carry, you will return, and the tools answer in their own language with a small bronze clink that never lies. Good work begins by asking hands to behave, and the room seems to approve. Linen sighs into order, salt settles, oil accepts its bowl without sulk, and even the lamp flame chooses a steady height. Payment is arranged to match the path chosen. A portion now to open the door between grief and craft. A portion mid-course when the salt has finished speaking. A portion at the end when names are written and the face is returned to the world. The ledger receives these steps as calmly as the table receives a body. Columns for materials, lines for labor, a place for the small mercies that have no price and are still recorded because remembrance is also a kind of currency. A brief silence belongs here, the same kind that arrives before a teacher begins. Not emptiness, but room for words to land in the right order, and for breath to agree to be steady. Good work begins by telling the path forward in declarative lines. Now the drying, then the shaping, then the sealing, then the naming, then the closing, each step a small table that appears just in time to hold the next necessary thing. The master lifts a strip of linen and measures without looking, as if the arm itself remembers the distance, and the cloth accepts the count the way a student accepts a lesson repeated kindly. Natron's scent arrives like chalk and cool shade, not sharp, not sweet. A reminder that the craft's first kindness is subtraction. Take away what will betray the shape before adding what will protect it. The resin bowl moves closer to the lamp, and the surface loosens at the edges, a patient softening that will later make the scene an agreement instead of a struggle. Good work begins by setting expectations where hands can see them. Bowls in a line, cloth stacked by width, tools in the order they will be asked to speak, and the shrine watching not as a judge, but as a witness who knows the story already. The family's representative stands near the door and receives the plan in sentences that do not hide difficulty and do not advertise it either. You will be told when to come. You will see what can be seen. You will rest when we work. A seal is pressed once more, and the wax takes it cleanly, and the tablet's edge is tied with a cord, so the knot can remember to stay until the last time it is untied with steady fingers. The first prayer is short and belongs to materials. Salt be dry, blade be true, oil be willing, cloth be strong, and the breath that follows is the answer, a small yes that moves around the room without a mouth. Good work begins by touching only what must be touched. The sheet's edge, the knot that kept last night's promise, the mat at its corner, the shoulder-through linen to confirm that weight is still a story of this world. The master's hand hovers and then settles like a seal on wax, firm without pressing, acknowledging the person and the task at the same time, an agreement to do what the path now requires. Apprentices move to their stations in the order the plan dictates. One at water, one at salt, one at cloth, one at resin, and the scribe lifts his pen the small height that marks the beginning of a new line. From this moment, the gruesome craft becomes ordinary craft spoken quietly, cutting that looks like tiding, drying that sounds like patience, rapping that reads like grammar, naming that feels like a hand placed on a shoulder in farewell. Good work begins by remembering why the work exists, so that the shape that carried a name can carry it farther, so that love has something to lean on when it talks to what it cannot keep, so that the living can lay down the heaviest part of the day. The resin smoke ribbon thins and rises toward the beam, and the beam does what beams do in this place, hold and say nothing, and the table does what tables do, receive and remember. The master says the last small utterance to the tools, the kind a craftsman says even when alone, behave, and be enough, and the tools, satisfied to be asked, are ready to begin their part of the long, exact kindness that lasts 70 days and then longer still. The plan sits in the air like a drawn line, and when breath steadies, the first task steps forward without raising its voice, because this room prefers promises kept over promises performed. Palm wine is uncorked, and the bite of it lifts into the shade so the hands remember they must be clean, and the blade remembers it is not here to argue. Cloth is folded and placed within reach, dry first, damp after, so blotting can happen without fumbling, and the table accepts the arrangement like a map that has learned the route. The left flank is chosen not as a secret, but as a rule that keeps chaos small, and the blade waits flat on the palm until the breath that leads the work says now. A shortcut, no flourish, a motion that exists to make space, not a statement, and the bronze answers with that quiet scrape against itself that means edge met flesh cleanly. Linen moves before eyes can think twice, blotting, not wiping, the way one saves ink from spreading across a page worth keeping, and the hand above it stays steady because it has been asked to behave. There is a metallic tong that arrives and fades, and the room does not chase it. It lets the air fold the smell away into the cooler corners where salt will rewrite it. This is the part where respect must be louder than nerves. Small bronze scraping, a bowl ready to receive. The incision held open just enough to speak its necessary sentence. The organs come in a sequence learned by repetition and kept for kindness, because order makes horror smaller. Liver first, the big worker that remembers every feast. Lungs next, the bellows that the room refuses to imagine moving now. Stomach and intestines, with their stories of every hunger and satisfaction, quieted carefully. Palm wine again, a rinse, a sting in the air, a gesture that says, "We see you as labor, not refuse," and bowls lined with linen receive each piece, so that fabric can teach softness to what has lost its own. Natron waits like a winter that will not harm, only preserve. Crystals poured over, into, around, until damp heat considers the offer and agrees to become mineral silence. Myths like to rush in here with knives and laughter. They are not invited, and the work does not match their stories, because the hands are not cruel and the cuts are not games. Each organ is lifted with two hands, not because it will fall, but because the hands remember what one might forget, and the bowl accepts the weight with a sound like a soft answer. The liver learns dryness, the lungs learn stillness, the stomach and intestines learn the patience of salt, and the scribe notes which jar will later carry which memory, without turning this into a braid. If the path chosen returns organs to the body, they will be wrapped and replaced. If jars will keep them, guardians will wait on their lids with faces that do not smile and do not sleep. A compassionate aside belongs here. What is taken is not insult, it is strategy. What is removed is not dismissed. It is given a different job that the heat cannot ruin. The heart stays. This is not theater. This is theology of the practical kind. And the chest remains the house of the scale, where a feather will one day be asked to speak. Linen blotting again, light, repetitive, the way rain learns a roof, and the incision is made honest with palm wine and oil so edges do not forget their manners. Now the part that stories like to exaggerate, and we will not. A hook through the nose, a skilled wrist, a motion learned to break what must be loosened, not a fishing expedition in a theater. The jewel is small, the path known, up through the nostril, a gentle breach at the bone that divides the memory's house from the face the world knew, and then a patient stirring that turns what cannot last into strands that can be drawn. There is no race against time, only pace against heat, and linen stands ready to catch what should not wander, blotting, containing, not displaying. A bowl receives what is removed without pride, and palm wine clears the air's story, so the room can keep speaking in its own calm voice. Memory will be kinder than method. This is why the curtain of words in this place hangs heavy. and why the hands do not narrate their work out loud. The skull is rinsed with wine, and then encouraged with oil so the future will not find the inside harsh, and a small tilt of the table helps what remains to settle where it will rest. Salt returns like a patient teacher and fills the spaces where warmth once taught the body its lessons, and damp heat gives up the argument by degrees until only mineral truth remains. Tools are set down and thanked in the small way this room prefers. A touch of cloth, a spot of oil, a return to the exact place that tells the next hand what story the tool has already finished. The incision is not a wound now. It is a door the craft will soon close, and resin will one day trace its edge like a signature that refuses to be boastful. Bronze makes a quiet remark against stone as an edge is refreshed, not for more cutting, but because good habits repeat even when the hard part passes. A cloth passes over the table's lip and catches what salt and patience left behind, and the sweep is toward a small bowl that was empty because emptiness was part of the plan. The scribe marks the page of wax not with gore, but with grammar, done, placed, dried, to be wrapped, and a dot that means this sentence is complete, and the next will begin when breath says so. A murmur of prayer crosses the room like a hand smoothing a blanket, not loud, not begging, just an agreement to keep being careful after the part that tempts hurry. The mouth is tended next, not with a knife, but with respect, cleaned and prepared for rituals still far away in the schedule, because preparation done early prevents the need for apology later. The face is not a site of drama here. It is a place of restoration that will come after dryness, and for now it is covered with a cloth that smells faintly of resin's future. Each bowl is moved a finger's width to show it has played its part, and the line they make at the foot of the table feels like a sentence that will soon end with the word enough. Palm wine cork returns to its place. Oil lid receives a thumb that presses down and twists. Salt bin accepts its cover with a sound like a page closing, where the bookmark already waits. If jars will be used, their interiors receive a breath of wine and a whisper of oil, and lids are tested to ensure faces meet necks without argument. Linen strips are torn for the bundles that will hold what was taken if they stay with the body, and each strip has its own brief breath as it parts, a soft yes to a soft demand. Memory will be kinder than method, a refrain for the hands as they pad, wrap, and tuck, making each shape quiet so that later eyes will not be reminded of today's necessary sentences. The room returns to its baseline music, small bronze scraping ones, then silence. Linen's whisper, the scribe's breath over cooling wax. The faintest scent of resin that has not yet been invited to speak. No one applauds this part, and no one should, because the work is not performance. It is custody, and the measure of its success is how little it leaves behind for the mind to rehearse in the dark. A hand touches the sheet where a shoulder waits underneath, and the touch says what the room cannot. We will close what we opened. We will quiet what we stirred. We will return the shape to the shape of a person. The first task bows out, and the next one enters. Dryness called by its true name, patience, and the table shifts its attention from taking to keeping, from heat to shade, from damp to mineral, as the plan continues without haste. Cutting pauses, keeping begins. The room exhale changes shape, and hands trade blades for bowls and cloth for salt. Natron waits, like a cool shore at noon, and cradles what lies on the table, with the impartial kindness of minerals that do not care about stories and are perfect for that reason. Packing starts at hollows, underarms, along the spine's little valleys, beneath the ribs where warmth once crowded, then into the torso, where the organs made their exit. And the crystals speak in their small voice when pressed, a hiss that sounds like relief. Salt cool against skin, not cold, not biting, just the temperature of shade held in a handful, poured, tucked, leveled with a palm, then topped until the shape rises like a low dune. A basin receives the overflow because there is always overflow, and an apprentice returns it to the bin because thrift is one of the workshop's hymns. The mouth is kept modestly closed with a gentle tie, the nostrils stuffed lightly with salt and linen, so the path taken earlier learns to be quiet, and the eyelids rest under a thin pad that will hold their line. On the first day, the air still remembers the body as a warm thing and answers with a thicker scent. By evening, salt has begun its patient lesson, and the room's story grows simpler. On the third day, the first check. Lift the edge of the salt blanket with 2 hands. Look for shine where there should not be shine. Add crystals where hollows have learned to hunger for dryness. Smooth what swells and tucks. On the 7th day, a small rotation, not a roll, not a turn, just a careful settling to teach the salt new angles. The mat under the table answers with a reed whisper when weight shifts as if offering advice. Jar lids tap as they are checked for looseness, a light percussion that keeps time with the broom's whisper across the floor, drawing a fresh border between order and the dust that always wants to test it. Apprentices move in a set of loops learned by souls as much as minds. Being to table, table to bin, broom to corner, cloth to shelf, shelf to tally, tally to master's nod, then back to the beginning. The scribe's wax fills with small notches that stand for days, and some days get a dot because something needed correcting and was corrected without complaint. Salt is stingy with speech, but generous with results, and by the 10th day the scent in the room has thinned enough to let resin be the louder voice even when its bowl is cold. On the 12th day, the fingers that check are gentler than on the 3rd, because the surface has learned to answer with a new firmness, and the cloth used for blotting earlier is now used for brushing crystals into obedient lines. Salt shifts from outside to inside work as time asks it. Threading into places fingers will not go again, and the bean's level lowers by a bowl or 2 that the ledger notices and no one else does. On the 14th day, monotony earns its praise. The same motions, the same cautions, the same jokes about salt being a stern teacher with a kind report card. The floor sounds different when the air dries. Broom bristles whisper in a higher note, and jar taps ring longer, and water poured to rinse hands evaporates faster on the stone. On the 17th day, The master's palm rests briefly on the cloth covering the face, and the pause is consent for the next 7 days to be exactly like these last 7 with a few small mercies added. Apprentices argue softly about the right amount to pack at the collarbones. The master settles it with 2 fingers, and the sentence that solves most things here: enough to hold. Not so much that it forgets how to be a body. On the 21st day, the workshop feels lighter, though nothing has left it yet. This is what dryness does to time. It takes the weight out of afternoons, and lets them pass as easily as a lid set true on a jar. The scent thins again, less metallic memory, more mineral promise, and even the door curtain seems to move more easily, as if air has learned to accept the rules. On the 25th day, a small crack in a bowl is noticed before it becomes a story. The scribe notes the replacement, and the apprentice who found it earns the privilege of cutting fresh cloth for the pads. On the 30th day, the check is longer. A careful lift of the salt blanket, a look at edges and hollows, a smoothing of seams, a decision to add or to leave, and the beans are topped off, so the last 10 days can be generous. Apprentices learn the trick of letting time do part of the work. A bowl filled and set aside, a cloth laid and left, a corner brushed and ignored until dust confesses its plan, and then is swept. On the 33rd day, the first joke about ghosts is made and immediately answered by a broom tap that sounds like a warning. Humor lives here, but it knows the edge of its mat. The scribe's tally grows a small forest of marks, and some are crossed lightly when checks were made twice, because the first time felt like a dream, and the second like a decision. On the 35th day, a jar lid is found stiff. A drop of oil and a patient twist returns it to good manners, and the apprentice learns that kindness costs less than force. Salt rests when the room rests. At noon, the beans are covered, the lamp is trimmed, a cup of thin beer finds a hand, and a heel of bread sits patiently until appetite returns enough to share it. On the 38th day, the master listens with fingertips, not ears, and nods at the new firmness that means the craft can begin to think about the next chapter of care. Jar lids tap in a short rhythm as their faces are dusted. The amulet keeper hums without words while counting, and the oil specialist warms his palm over a bowl like a small sun cold in early. On the 40th day, the salt gives its last small hiss under fingers, and the beans are closed with gratitude, and the room feels like a page turned carefully, not a door slammed. Crystals are brushed back into bowls. The mat is shaken outside, where wind can carry away the grit that did not help, and the table is wiped with a damp cloth that leaves a dark path that dries into a pale, patient line. What remains on the table is not brittle, it is taut. The shape keeps its shape without argument, and the air around it holds a quiet that is not empty. It is full of the work's result. Silence teaches best when it is shared. The master lets it settle. The scribe sets his pen down. The apprentices stand still long enough to hear the broom whisper and the jar lids answer, and then the room breathes out together. The next tasks wait just beyond the edge of this calm, but they are not invited yet. The lesson of salt and patience deserves its own ending, and the workshop gives it one. A nod at the bins, a touch on the table, a wordless agreement that care through monotony is a kind of devotion that does not need a witness. Dryness has finished its lesson and left the room in a clean quiet, and the body on the table answers the touch of a palm with firmness instead of surrender, which is the sign everyone waits for before inviting scent and softness back. Oils come first, each with a job that is more than fragrance, cedar sharp to seal and discourage what does not belong, most sweet to bless and to soften unguents that glide into places salt made honest, so that hollows will not accuse the living of neglect. Pads are made from linen and laid where shape needs memory, cheeks, throat, the slope of the shoulder, the gentle rise at the chest that tells a story even when lungs are no longer invited. A brush meets oil and carries it in small arcs across skin that has learned to accept help without arguing, and the room scent changes from mineral to human again, though it is a human made of resin and patience, so that joints will not protest when bandages ask them to hold still. A thin line of oil greases the diplomacy between linen and elbow, between linen and knee, and the specialist watches for where cloth would rather catch than cooperate. Resin warms in a shallow bowl until it loosens like honey considering summer, and a fine thread of it is drawn along edges that will soon meet, not to glue, not yet, but to promise that the meeting will be peaceful, so that the mouth will remember how to speak when symbols ask it to. A small pad is placed within, scented faintly, and the tie that kept the jaw polite is replaced with a subtler arrangement that holds without announcing itself. Linen whispers as the first long strip passes under wrists and over hands, and the sound builds with each wrap the way reeds build a riverbank, soft at first, then certain, then inevitable, so that the outline will return from anatomy to person. Padding is added in quiet increments, and the face receives a delicate scaffolding that will sit beneath a mask or panel later, offering a canvas steadier than salt alone. The amulet keeper steps forward with the map only the keeper can see, a throat charm for breath, a heart scarab for measure and mercy, a pair at the wrists for action remembered, a tongue piece so that truth will have a path, so that intention will not be forgotten in a room full of actions. Each amulet is touched to oil, named in a voice barely above linen's rub, and placed where the body will understand the instruction even after names fade. Wrapping continues in courses the way fields are planted, fingers to forearms, forearms to elbows, elbows to shoulders, then chest in a path that crosses itself like careful handwriting, so that time cannot undo what patience did. Knots are tied with authority and courtesy, pulled until they creak once, then agree to rest, and resin kisses the knot lightly so it will keep its promise. The oil specialist returns with a blend that belongs to the outer layers, less for softening, more for sanctifying, a smell that says to the air, and to insects, and to doubt, not for you, so that the hands look like hands, and not bundles. Each finger is wrapped on its own path before joining the palm, and the apprentice responsible learns the satisfaction of seeing knuckles reappear in linen relief. The chest is bound in overlapping bands that climb like steps, and padding beneath ensures the rise looks like breath's memory and not the ache of tight cloth, so that the head will keep its dignity through travel and time. A cap of linen is formed and smoothed, then joined to the bands at the throat with hidden stitches that lay flat and behave. The linen whisper becomes a hush as layers build. More fabric, less room for air to speak. More order, less opportunity for edges to argue. So that sight and hearing will have symbols even if senses rest. Small pieces are pressed at the corners of eyes and just behind the ears, and a line of resin traces the path as if drawing a road on a map. Outer bindings are chosen by width and by mood, narrow where detail is needed, broad where authority should be visible, and every few turns the master's hand tests for fairness so one side does not overrule the other, so that the story reads as a person, not a package. The shoulders are rounded with care, the hips acknowledged, the feet given the modesty of their own wrapping, and the final tie is placed where it will be strong and unnoticed. Warm resin seals edges at seams and corners, a glossy line that catches light with discretion, and the smell lands in the room like a final chord, so that names will have a place to land. A panel is measured and set aside, and the scribe prepares the words that will keep anonymity from slipping in uninvited. Hands pass over the work not as judges, but as readers confirming sense. Smooth here, add there, lift and settle. Check the knot that spoke too loudly and ask it to whisper instead, so that the living can bear to look and feel something other than the first day's ache. A small amount of color is promised for later, a touch at the brow, a line near the mouth, a sign that this is a face, not a task. The last bindings cross the chest and lay down along the sides, and the hands meet over the stomach in a shape that human bodies recognize in sleep and in statues, so that the workshop can let go and the next place can receive. A final utterance is spoken that thanks materials by name, and the shrine gets its share of gratitude in bread and smoke. Silence arrives again, this time lighter. Oil has done its work. Resin has drawn its lines. Linen has written its long paragraph, and the body reads now as a person addressed with care, so that tomorrow can be for presentation. The table is cleared without haste, bowls returned, cords hung, and the mat straightened as if smoothing a bed before rest. The room, satisfied, holds the shape in its cool center, and the air keeps the last of the myrrh sweetness long enough to bless the door curtain as it moves. And then it lets the sweetness go the way careful work lets worry go when it is finally done. Morning returns to the workshop as a softer kind of quiet, and the shape on the table reads as a person again, ready for the part where identity is not only remembered but displayed with care. The panel is measured first, a calm rectangle of patience that will sit where the face has been carefully restored under linen, and the fit is checked with fingertips at brow, cheek, and chin, so the match is kind, not tight. Gesso smells like chalk and clean dust as it is smoothed across the panel's surface, a thin, even coat that invites color to hold fast later, and the grain of the ground quiets under the brush like sand after wind. A second pass fills the last tiny hollows, so the face will not inherit shadows it did not earn, and the brush hair whispers against stiffened linen, where the panel will meet the wrapped head. Pigments wait like small hills in shallow dishes, earth colors with temperaments, red with warmth, yellow with patience, black with authority, each mixed with a measured mouthful of binder until the paint answers the brush without clumping. The outline is drawn with a sure line that knows what it is describing. Brows where they once sat, eyes opened not like a portrait searching for someone, but like an emblem ready to be recognized by gods and by memory. Features are not invented so much as remembered with allegiance to likeness and to ideal both, because the goal is recognition and honor at once, not a mirror, but a promise. The nose is shaped with a careful crease of light along one side, the mouth defined with a line meant to rest, not speak, and the cheeks receive a breath of color, so the panel suggests vitality without pretending to grant it. A border frames the face in patterns the household has chosen. Modest if means are modest, more intricate if the ledger allowed. Either way, the same care is given, because the body will not be anonymous. Names come next, and names take their time. The scribe reads them aloud, slow and clear. Father's name and mother's name, titles earned, roles lived, small kindnesses that deserve ink alongside offices. Each sign is painted steady, the brush lifted and set, so that the words do not crowd, and the panel becomes a statement that the person is still someone, not a shape that drifted away. The phrase that matters most is repeated in the rune's cadence. The body will not be anonymous, and the panel agrees with letters that will outlast breath and outlast grief's first noise. Titles are chosen honestly, the ones that fit without puffing pride, the ones that children and neighbors would nod to, and the scribe checks spacing so nothing important falls off the edge or into a seam. Seams on the wrapping are inspected for fairness. A finger trails along ridges and meets resin's earlier promises, and where a whisper more is needed, a warm line is drawn to close a doubt. The panel meets the face for fitting, placed and lifted, tilted and returned, as the master listens with his hands for the balance that lets the panel settle without pressing, the way a lid learns ajar. A thin bed of softened resin is painted on the mounting points, so the panel will sit as if welcomed, not forced, and a breath is held as it is laid, then released when the panel decides to stay. Edges are sealed with a careful line of warmth that glows a touch before it cools to a modest gloss, and the room inhales a faint sweetness as resin finishes its final task for the day. Along the sides, where bindings cross like woven thought, the master checks knots for the single creak that means agreement, and adds a touch of resin where travel will test them. The scribe returns with a narrow brush to add the smaller words that make a life legible. The district, the household marker, the festival days kept with devotion, the craft practiced with competence and pride. Gesso's chalk underfinger comes away pale, proof that it cured properly, and the painted letters sit firm, not bleeding, an assurance that the room's patient work has the blessing of materials. A small panel for the chest is prepared for those who choose it. bearing a heart emblem or a vow. And the paint there is darker, an emphasis where judgment and hope will someday meet. Again the refrain, the body will not be anonymous, spoken softly so that it becomes part of the air, and the apprentices hear it as instruction for their own hands long after this day. The brush is rinsed carefully, the water darkens in gentle swirls, and a cloth wipes bristles until they point like a reed pen prepared to behave in the morning. A final inspection moves from crown to heel, panel firm, names legible, seams neat, bindings even, amulet placements felt through layers with the fingertips of the keeper who can tell by touch what lies where. Resin receives one more small flame and gives back gloss at the places where edges meet air, and the light that catches there is small and sufficient, not a show, just as seal. Closing prayers begin without anyone needing to announce them, the master's voice low, the apprentices adding breaths between words, the scribe bowing his head over the tablet that recorded promises kept. The prayers name materials as companions, salt thanked for patience, linen for obedience, oil for diplomacy, resin for binding, and tools for remembering what they were asked to do. Then the prayers name the person again by name and by role, and the panel is touched lightly as if the words might settle better if they feel the surface that will carry them. The room holds its breath for the line that seals the moment. The body will not be anonymous, and after it is spoken, air moves again, and the lamp's flame steadies, as if in agreement. A clean cloth that belongs only to words is lifted and let rest across the shrine's small ledge, a sign that speech has done its portion and silence can resume its share. Gesso, pigment, resin, the trio returns quietly to their shelves, brushes laid hair up, bowls nested, lids facing outward like sleeping faces that know they will be woken kindly. The face on the panel looks back with composed recognition, not alive, but not lost, and the workshop accepts that steadiness as its own reflection. A last check of the floor clears stray chalk and lint. The brooms whisper tucking the day's traces into a corner where they cannot trouble anyone, and the door curtain is lifted for a breath of outside. Names are read once more, slower than before, as if the syllables themselves needed time to arrive and take their seats in the room's memory, and the scribe presses his seal in wax that will travel with the body. The master places his palm against the side, where bindings lie flat, and finds only order under his hand, and that is the signal he trusts more than any speech to say, completed for this stage. The apprentices step back in a small arc that leaves the path clear, and the shrine receives a crumb and a breath of smoke so gratitude can have shape along with scent. Resin's final gloss dims to a quiet sheen as it cools, and the panel sits without argument, a face ready to travel through streets that will look and then look away in the old respectful way. The workshop breathes out the last of its concentration and lets the evening settle along beams and shelves. And the body on the table, no longer anonymous, rests under its own name as if a door has closed gently behind it and a new one has opened just as gently ahead. The face holds steady and the gloss has cooled, and when the door curtain lifts, the room steps aside for the street to do its part, because the path ahead is wider than any table, and the work now needs feet and voices. Shoulder straps bite politely as the weight is lifted, not pain. More like a reminder that carrying is a conversation between muscle and respect, and the first steps are taken small so the rhythm can find itself before the world crowds in. Outside to inside, inside to outside. The chorus begins at the threshold as the air changes temperature and brightness, and the procession learns its breathing pattern in the first dozen paces. A drum somewhere far ahead keeps a pulse, like a heart heard through a wall, steady enough to trust, but distant enough to keep grief from taking the lead. And the feet of the bearers answer with a soft agreement on the packed earth. Controlled wails rise on either side, not to undo anyone, but to make room for sorrow to move without breaking the line, voices lifting then folding like waves that know the shore is close and will not be bullied. Dust lifts under sandals and hangs in sunlight like reminders not to rush, and the bundles of offerings swing in time with the pace. Baskets of bread, jars of beer stoppered and tied, a small bundle of onions, a folded cloth for hospitality at the next place. Outside to inside, doorways pass like slow blinks as the streets narrow then widen. The shade deepens then thins. Greetings bow the air, and then withdraw so the path stays clear, and children are guided to the side with gentle palms. A singer takes up a thread of praise that threads through the wails and keeps them from becoming a net. Names spoken with a cadence that remembers the person and not just the event. Each syllable like a step placed carefully where stone meets sand. The offerings are counted aloud in a calm voice that does not lose track. Loaves enough for the first days, beer for thirst, and for rites, oil in a small jar, salt in a pouch, a knife wrapped in cloth for the symbolic gesture that will not harm anyone. Outside to inside, the city's edge announces itself by the way wind changes, carrying open ground and fewer voices, and the drum grows nearer, as if the earth itself were helping carry. Shoulder straps are adjusted once, twice, knots checked by habit rather than fear, and the bearers speak to one another in short phrases that leave no room for misunderstanding. Higher, slower, ready, turn. The procession stretches and compresses like breath, and the street learns to move around it the way water moves around a boat, not resisting, simply finding new paths for a little while. Controlled wails return in a higher key at a corner where a shrine watches, then drop to a hum as the road tilts upward, and the drum keeps choosing patience over drama. Outside to inside, the tune field begins like a whisper, ground rippling with low walls and door mouths that smell faintly of lamp oil and stone kept cool for a purpose, and conversations behind the procession retreat to give silence the front seat. Dust settles on ankles. Someone offers water, which is sipped and handed back, and a drop falls and darkens the earth, and then disappears. A small rehearsal for the kind of vanishing everyone here understands. The offering's inventory repeats, so nothing is forgotten at the last. Bread counted by loaves, beer by jars, and by lips pressed tight to promise they were not tasted. Onions by bulbs, oil by the line meniscus makes in the neck of glass, cloth by folds, salt by weight in the palm. Outside to inside, the tomb mouth receives the first shadow of the day's purpose, and the air changes with a bite of lamp oil, a cool that rises from stone, and the light thins to a ribbon that lays across the threshold and stops. The bearers pause at the door for the briefest inspection, straps secure, panels steady, bindings calm, and the master sets a hand on the side and reads only order under the linen. Controlled wails turn into a low call and response just outside, so sound will not chase the work inside and make echoes, where silence should be the leader. And the singer keeps a thread going like a lantern for those who must wait. Outside to inside, one step down, then another, long, rolling breaths in the cool corridor, shoulders squaring to narrower space, eyes adjusting to the truth that daylight has been invited only as a guest. Dust quits the air and settles on the shoulders of the stone instead, and the lamp flame in the hand of the master makes a circle that moves with the procession like a tame star. The offerings follow in order, and the inventory whispers again in the tight space. Bread to the left, beer to the right, salt near the threshold, oil by the lamp niche, cloth folded where hands will find it later, knife set where it cannot surprise anyone. Outside to inside, a final doorway opens into a chamber that has been waiting, walls that learned names from other families listening for new ones, and the table inside answers the bearers with a silence that sounds like agreement. Shoulder straps release with that same polite bite undone, and the weight settles onto stone without complaint, and a breath moves through the group in a wave that can be heard but not seen. The drum falls away like a sound that found its ending, and the wails outside soften as if the air had put a hand on them and asked for quiet while the room receives what it was built to receive. Lamp oil bites the back of the throat just once, and then becomes part of the air, and the flame is trimmed to keep smoke from writing on the ceiling a story no one needs to read. Outside to inside, the chorus ends as the master speaks a single word that means arrived, and the apprentices answer by placing their hands flat on the stone a moment, the way people touch a threshold to borrow its steadiness. The offerings are set in their first positions, not final, never final yet, because arrangement is its own small right and must be earned by quiet, careful minutes. In the cool of the tomb, breath is easier, and the day outside feels like a rumor. The dust on sandals looks brighter by lamplight, and the path back out already feels longer than the path in. The face on the panel finds its place in the new light and seems to agree with the room that this is the right address. And the master's nod completes what the drum began at the workshop door. A rhythm kept, a burden carried, a threshold crossed properly. Arrival becomes arrangement, and arrangement becomes right. And in the tune's cool the gestures take over, where walking left off, because hands know what to do when words have said enough. The opening of the mouth begins with an adze touching the panel at the lips, and then the corners of the eyes, a light, ceremonial contact that does not seek to convince stone, and would to become flesh, only to give symbol its path to function. Incense blooms in the small burner held near the face, and the smoke writes a temporary halo, that the air immediately edits, and the scent becomes the room's way of remembering breath without pretending to restore it. A tool shaped like a small chisel taps lightly at places where senses once reported, and the master speaks the lines that belong here with a cadence learned long ago. See, hear, smell, taste, speak, not as demands, but as invitations for meaning to continue in another address. A cord twists under a thumb as a bundle is tied, and the not small creak is the sound of agreement. Goods for use, not for show. Placement for finding, not for display. Bread is set within reach as if the morning could arrive here without sun. Beer placed where a hand would naturally go. Oil in a niche that remembers hands. Salt where thresholds like to be guarded. And a knife wrapped and set with care in its symbolic quiet. Guardians take their posts in a logic that does not need to be explained aloud. Jackal where paths cross. Falcon where eyes stand watch. Baboon where keeping records needs a keeper. Human where the human heart requires a companion. Stone gives a cool reply to each bowl and jar as it meets the surface. Not a sound exactly, more a shared understanding that weight has a home. Sealing begins with wax warmed between fingers, pressed with a seal that travels back to the scribe's tablet in memory, and a touch of resin draws a thin, patient line where lids meet mouths. The master lowers his hand over the panel's brow without touching and speaks a final named line, slow and clear, because identity, said carefully, is a kind of door that closes without slamming. A small bowl of water is lifted and poured in a thin stream along the threshold stone, a libation that teaches the floor how to be kind to feet leaving and to feet returning. The family's representative steps forward for a touch, to fingers on the linen at the shoulder, a breath that sounds like a word, but is not one, and then steps back so craft can finish. Backward steps begin, because respect prefers not to turn its back until the last possible moment. One step, pause, another step, pause, eyes reading the room's edges to keep a straight path out. Apprentices gather the last tools without hurry, cloths collected, bowls nested, lamp trimmed so smoke will not try to leave messages, and the scribe's tablet receives a final dot that means completed. At the door, hands press lightly to stone as if shaking hands with the place, and a brief prayer thanks rock for keeping cool and keeping counsel. Incense has one more small bloom at the threshold, a polite exhale that the corridor accepts, and the flame is pinched gently so the room will own its darkness without feeling abandoned. Outside to inside has finished its chorus. Now inside to outside answers with quieter lines. Cooler to warmer, shadow to sun, stone underfoot to dust, lump smell to baked air. The last foot crosses, and the door read answers. Then the seal is pressed where it should be, clay receiving the mark with the satisfaction of work that will hold. Silence gathers where voices stood a moment ago, the kind of silence that is full rather than empty, and the tune becomes itself again, not a room with visitors, but a room with a resident and purpose. The path back to the workshop feels shorter, because there is less to carry, and longer, because there is more to think, and the drum is gone, replaced by the faint sounds of ordinary day resuming its list. At the wabet, tools meet water in a sequence that belongs to closing. Blades rinsed and dried, edges oiled and wrapped, bowls scrubbed until resin gives up its shine and becomes readiness again. Cloths washed and hung where shade will finish what water began. The adze used for the rite is wiped with a cloth reserved for words and placed near the shrine, because even tools that only touch meanings deserve a careful rest. The cord that learned today's knots is coiled with the memories still in it, and set where hands can find it tomorrow, and ask it to behave in the same way. The table is cleared and wiped in wide circles that shrink and shrink until they become a polished stillness, and the room takes back its original shape, shade, salt, linen, waiting for the next name. Hands are washed last, as if to make sure the day leaves the body before the body leaves the room. Water cool and clean, a final libation for the workers themselves. The master checks the door, the bins, the shelf where tools sleep, and offers the smallest nod to the shrine that watched. Silence after last footfall, a good silence, one that protects rather than erases, and in it the workshop keeps its promise to become ordinary again, so it can be extraordinary when called.